IPE WU Careers. You want to learn about jobs that combine politics and economics? Our students have collected questions for people with interesting jobs that combine politics and economics.
This is Laura. Laura works for Doctors Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders is an international humanitarian medical organization that provides medical care and assistance to people in crisis situations such as conflict zones or natural disasters. Laura is the General Director of Doctors Without Borders Austrian Section. Hello, Laura. Thank you for being here for today.
Thank you for the invite.
Ohne Papiere would like to know, what advice would you give someone who wants to pursue a career in an international field?
That's a good question. I don't think it would be so different to pursuing a career in other fields, to be honest. I think it's important to know what you yourself want, what you enjoy doing. And actually the biggest advice I can give is to try different things. It took me quite a long time to figure out where I really want to work, what kind of work I really enjoy. So doing different internships is probably a good idea to start. And I guess because it's international, it's also good to get international exposure. So be open to go and live in other countries and try different things.
Student wants to know, is wondering, was this job always a dream of yours?
Absolutely. And I'm still actually surprised every now and again that I'm in this position and in this job. My father's from Argentina, and when I was a little girl, I remember visiting family in South America and realizing how many people in this world don't have the same opportunities that we do back in Austria, for example. And I was stubborn back then already, and I knew this is the field I want to work in. And so I tried my best and managed to end up really in development work and humanitarian work. So absolutely.
I have so many overlaps, would be interested to hear. How do you balance your own interests and values with the interests and values of the organization you represent?
For me, that's really key and core, to be honest. I don't think I would ever want to work for an organization where the values don't fit. For me, that's more important than salaries or anything material. I really want to work and further the objectives of an organization that I fully and truly believe in. Of course, it'll never be 100% of a match all the time, but overall, for me, that is important. And I think that would even be a reason for me not to take a job if that wasn't the case.
Blub Blub is curious. How do you personally think about the criticism that your organization portrays itself as white saviors?
I think it's really important feedback, and I honestly fully agree in the sense that Doctors Without Borders, for being such a huge global international organization working in over 75 countries, has still quite a long way to go in terms of diversity and inclusion. And I'm really glad that we have started working on this very seriously in the past few years. But obviously there's quite a lot to catch up. And I think getting this kind of feedback externally was also an important facilitation to get this process going.
Sunbathe24 would like to know, how much do you earn?
It's interesting because some people will say, wow, I earn way too much as the head of an NGO. Others would say, oh my God, that's very little for all of the responsibility that you have. My salary is transparently open and shared with each financial annual report that we have. I think we're the only NGO in Austria that does that. And I can also let you know that I am the general director that earns the least of all of the big NGOs. Very deliberately so. I earn about 4,200 net a month. And we're making sure that the person that earns the least in the organization and the person that earns the most, i.e. my role, there's no more than a 3 times difference there, because we want to keep a certain equality, I guess. And also we're fully funded by private donations. So we're really cautious and careful with salaries and costs.
Brad Pitt wants to find out, have you ever been at the brink of quitting your job? And if so, what had happened and how did you overcome this crisis?
I have quit jobs. And to be honest, it is usually not the job I quit. It's usually the manager or line manager that I quit. In situations where I don't get along well with the culture or with my direct supervisor, or situations where I decided to leave. I usually left, though, only once I had something else lined up, and I usually left in good terms, but those were, to be very frank, the reasons that I have quit jobs.
Alias is wondering, what is the most mentally demanding part of your job?
That's a good question. Of my job right now, probably being faced with, I guess all of these crises and all of this often unnecessary suffering every single day, all around the world. I often hear and see things that I honestly wish wouldn't exist. And to be honest, also sometimes wish I wouldn't know about. But at the same time, that is also my motivation to do this job, because I feel that I can at least contribute to making the lives of the people that suffer so much a little bit better.
Robert Clementine, the 42nd of Wilfordshire Lane, is curious. Why did you make the shift from private consulting to public NGO work?
For me, it was actually in a way the other way around. As I explained before, I've always wanted to work in the field of development or humanitarian aid. And I did several internships throughout my studies, both in NGOs, but also in the UN and other organizations. And I wasn't really happy anywhere. I didn't find sort of my place. And then by coincidence, this opportunity to join a private sector consulting company, the Boston Consulting Group in my case, came up, and I thought, why not? And I have to say, it was one of the steepest learning curves I've ever had. It was one of the best experiences in terms of culture and the way that you were treated and supported there. And I've learned lots and lots of tools and ways of working that I still use today. So it's been super valuable. I ended up not staying very long because I always wanted to go back and work in development, but I still have close contact, and it's been a really valuable network for me.
Loving the WU would like to know, does it ever feel like there's no hope for humanity and that we will always have conflict and corruption?
Yes, it does feel so, especially at the moment, no? With all of the things going on, so many different crises and epidemics and natural disasters and everything. But at the same time, that is reality. I think that we've been very lucky in the past generations to, particularly in Europe, live in such a peaceful society. But at the same time, it's not an option, for me at least, to close my eyes or to turn my head away. So I try to at least contribute a little bit to make the world a better place. And the little victories, the little things where we do manage to save lives, to make people's lives better, where things do change for the better, give me the energy and motivation to continue.
Holly Golightly wants to learn, what was the day in your working life that had the most impact on you so far, and why?
I think there are lots of days that have different types of impacts, but probably the one day that literally shattered me the most was when I was living and working in Nepal a few years ago. I was there with my husband and my little son, and we experienced the massive earthquake at that time. It was 2015. We were there, and there was a 7.8 on the Richter scale earthquake that hit Nepal, with many thousands of people dying, and obviously also us at first, being in immediate danger, but managing to save ourselves, and just realizing the sheer power of such natural disasters and how exposed people are, particularly when they don't have good infrastructure and a good social system and functioning government to support them. It was very eye-opening for me, and it put a lot of things in perspective again.
Inara is wondering, how might studying politics and economics help me develop the skills necessary for your job?
So in my experience, and I didn't study just politics or just economics, but I studied I have quite a generalist background with quite a bit of economics and politics in there as well. And the tools and the skills, for example, to be able to analyze a lot of information and comprise it into digestible, clear information is something that is really useful. And sort of that analytical, strategic mindset and understanding how societies, how governments as well, and how economies function is incredibly useful for, really all kinds of things.
Ralph Lorraine would be interested to hear, what is the best way to learn managerial skills if you're an introvert?
It's an interesting discussion, and for me, diversity, for example, also has that dimension in it. I think it's very important to look at the different characteristics of people that work together. And I am convinced that it's always important to have a good mix. So have both introverts and extroverts in all different kinds of positions, because that way an organization can be strong. I think what is important, though, in a leadership position is your ability to communicate and lead other people. So having that social competence, but it doesn't mean that you need to be very extrovert. I end up speaking in front of hundreds of people. I end up in TV interviews. I end up, being in the spotlight quite a bit. And to be honest, I don't like it. Every single time I'm nervous. I'm not happy about it, but I do it because I do it for the organization. And it's really been a step for me to overcome that resistance, to overcome that fear. For example, speaking up in a group, asking a question. But by doing that, you realize actually, okay, nothing happens, and you even become maybe a role model for others. So I think that's maybe a little bit of an advice that I can give you is I don't think anybody enjoys that. I don't think hardly anyone is sort of a real extrovert. It's just trying and giving it a try and going for it.
Green Lantern wants to ask, what kinds of skills did you learn at university that come in handy now?
Yeah, I think I mentioned some of that before already. I think for me, it's on the one hand, really the subject matter. So depending on what you study, it can become really handy for the different jobs that you do. But on the other hand, it's also the way of being analytical, of being strategic, of condensing a lot of information, of digesting information, of being able to present in a very structured and also understandable manner. That's something that is really important in jobs. For me, one of the biggest tools that I took along, and I think I can say this here because you are probably a group that understands this, was the political economy and using political economy analysis pretty much for everything in my life, both on my personal, but also a lot on my work site. So really understanding what are the incentives behind certain decisions, who would be winning or losing from change, why is there resistance, and really looking sort of a step deeper there. And then, of course, learning how to present things, learning how to maybe speak in public. So I think there are lots of things that university is really useful for.
Lover of WU would like to know, what job opportunities exist when studying politics and economics?
I would say everything and nothing. No, I'm joking. Actually, everything, no, because both of them are quite generalist studies, which basically mean that you have a whole host of opportunities open to you. But I think sometimes where that choice can seem quite overwhelming. So again, my advice would be listen to yourself, know what you really enjoy, because I think that if you really enjoy something, this is also when you're really good, you excel at something. And that's then where you, manage to probably get a lot of good job opportunities. So I'd rather say pretty much everything with that background, and it's up to you to then narrow it down what you want to make of it.
Lop123 wants to learn, to what extent are academic theories helpful in your job?
That's also a good question. I think a little bit like I mentioned before, they are helpful, but there's always this need of translation into practice. So what I do a lot, both in humanitarian aid, but particularly when I worked on the ground in development cooperation and a lot of rural development, but also in public financial management and these things, it was really important to have a solid academic basis, but then really use these theories and that basis to translate into the context that you're working in, because that context is different every single time. And it's very rare that you can take a theory and just one-on-one transfer it, but having that as the basis is very important.
James Bond is wondering, who's the most interesting person you have ever met?
I've been lucky to meet lots of interesting people, and I've met presidents, I've met famous people, but to be honest, one of the most interesting people I've ever met is a colleague of mine at Doctors Without Borders. She is now from Uganda. She used to be a Rwandan refugee that grew up in a Ugandan refugee camp and actually had her life saved by Doctors Without Borders when she was a little child, and that of her siblings too. And she grew up to become a nurse, inspired by the work that we do, and now works for Doctors Without Borders internationally. And just her story and the way that she sort of managed to develop and the change that she brings to her community and her family, but also the teams on the ground, is probably one of the most inspiring people I've ever met.
Brett Pitt wants to ask, do you have a role model? If so, who?
I wouldn't say I have one role model. I think I have lots of different role models for, different areas in life. And for me, one of the most important sources for motivation, and I guess in that sense, role models, are usually when I'm in projects and I get to spend some time with, in the case of Doctors Without Borders, some of the patients, but generally the beneficiaries, and just I'm able to experience the amazing strength and resilience that people have going through a real hardship, but they're still able to see the bright side of things, and they're still happy, and there's still laughter, and there's still sort of that real, joy of life there. I think for me, that again puts a lot of things in perspective, and in that sense, they are real role models.
Queen Amidala would like to know, how do you maintain a positive relationship with political leaders when some of these politicians are responsible for the suffering your organization seeks to address?
That's a very good question. I guess I'm lucky with Doctors Without Borders that, like I said before, we're fully privately funded. That means we take no funds from government, and therefore we're not dependent on government at all, and therefore I don't need to be too friendly to government either. But of course there needs to be a respectful, interaction, especially because a lot of the time we also do a lot of advocacy work with them. But at the same time, it gives me the freedom and also the legitimacy to actually go and speak to them about some of the suffering that we see that in some cases they are responsible for, and that's something that I do a lot. If I can speak openly here, that was a bit more challenging for me working for governments. So in my professional life, I've worked for the German, the Austrian, and the UK government, and they're depending on which political parties were in power. I did have to work for political parties that I didn't always share the values with, but there it was about creating a space and still being able to create change within that professional space that really helped me. And I think if there were certain, red lines that were crossed, then I probably would have stopped working there.
Escapist wants to learn, do you and your organization have an impact on politicians and their decisions?
We try to. And sometimes I would say we really do. In Austria, for example, one of the important topics that we're doing very specific advocacy work on is access to affordable medicines, because we see that a lot of the people that we work for are suffering or dying because they don't have access to medicines, even though they would exist. And so creating this awareness with politicians and governments, in our case in Austria, is really important. And we've actually had some real successes as well, where governments then took the stand to actually support our advocacy lines and our asks, and are slowly starting to change things. Of course, within the EU, for example, Austria is just one voice. That's where we work very closely with our other sections in European countries, all trying to influence the governments in that area and hoping for change.
Love Politics, Despise Politicians 2003 wants to find out, do you think that governments mostly help or hinder you doing your job?
Maybe one point first. We're a non-political organization, so we usually work where politics have failed. So either in natural or in man-made disasters. But we often see the consequences of political failure, and that's sometimes quite tough, at least for me personally, to swallow that a lot of the suffering is made because of bad politics. At the same time, we couldn't work in any of the countries if we wouldn't be allowed to from government. And we do have situations where we can't work because we don't have access to a country because they don't want us there. But in most cases, because we are respected and accepted as a very neutral and impartial organization, we usually are able to go and work. So I would say in that sense, supportive, though we don't want and need and wouldn't accept any active support from governments.
Laura, this was it. Thank you so much for answering all our questions.
Thank you, and I love all of your nicknames.
Want more information? Visit the Institute for International Political Economy. You will find podcasts analyzing current events, TikTok videos defining key concepts, and courses explaining the world.